much. Yeshua Koach was beautiful.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
But I don't really.
And the Am Yisrael should be protected. Klal Yisrael all over the world.
Amen. Amen.
And enough with the wars and sacrifices. You know, I don't like using the word sacrifices like that, but you know what I mean. People
Right.
that die L'Kiddush Hashem. I just want peace everywhere. That we should all be happy and not just our lives, but our properties as well.
Amen. Okay, we have to get started now. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to mute everyone. Especially Ben.
Abraham.
Good morning, Jerry. Shavua Tov. What do you mean?
Ready? Okay, good morning. Welcome to our fourth installment on Jewish humor. Today's class is sponsored in memory of Moshe Lev ben Avraham. Which yard site is it? This 26th yard site. The Shama should have an aliyah. It's also, I want to dedicate today's class to the Jews in Israel, the soldiers in particular, and also for the American soldiers who are in the area that needs God's protection. May Hashem protect them all. And I want to begin with a psalm, say it in Hebrew, then translate it. Psalm 121. Shir Lamalois, Esa Einai El Haharim, Me'ayin Yava Ezri, Ezri Me'im Adonai, Eisei Shemayim Va'aretz, Al Yitain Lamayt Raglecha, Al Yanum Shemrecha, Hine La Yanum V'la Yishan Shemer Yisrael, Adonai Shemrecha, Adonai Tzilcha Yad Yeminecha, Yaimam Hashemesh Le'yakeka V'yareach B'layla, Adonai Yishmarcha Mikol Ra'a Yishmar Snapshecha, Adonai Yishmar Tzeischa Uveyecha Me'ata V'yad Eilam. A song to the essence. I lift my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help will come from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot falter. Your guardian does not slumber. Indeed, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your protective shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your going and your coming from now and to eternity. Some people might feel a little uncomfortable talking about humor at a time when the Jewish people are involved in a struggle for its very existence. We're not talking about a minor war. We're talking about the potential for annihilation, God forbid. And while the world is able to look by and say, well, you know, it's who says they really have a nuclear capability and why should we get involved? The world will certainly, if God forbid this would ever come to fruition and there'd be another Holocaust, the world would say, it's so sad that 7 million Jews had to be killed, and they'll make memorials for us. But we're not interested in the memorials. We're interested in our own survival and our own existence. And if Israel would have been not deterred from doing what it had to do years ago, when Iran did not have the capability of sending missiles the way they have today, it wouldn't have been as difficult. So many more lives could have been saved. When the world tries to stop Israel from winning the war, then what happens is that there are more casualties on the other side as well. If Israel would have finished off Hamas years ago, when they fought Hamas, without America and Europe intervening and the evil UN intervening, they would have had no need to kill as many civilians, not intentionally, of course, and there would be fewer people. So it reminds me of a joke. And the joke is that someone committed some type of a crime, and they told him, we have 3 punishments you could choose. You could eat the spoiled, rotten fish. You can get 30 lashes, or you could pay a $10,000 fine. The guy was very cheap. He didn't want to pay the money. He didn't want to get beaten with the lashes. So he decided, I'll eat the smelly fish. And he's eating it, and he's ready to vomit, and he can't take it. He eats 6/7 of it. And then he says, I can't take it anymore. Give me the lashes. And they give him the lashes. When they're up to lashes 26, he said, I can't take it anymore. I'll pay the fine. You end up having to suffer all the consequences, not just one. But again, how do we reconcile humor with the situation that's going on right now? And the answer is, number one, there's an expression in Chassidic literature that simcha, the joy, breaks through barriers. Whenever there are barriers, whenever there are obstacles, the way to break them is not through sadness, but through joy. There's another concept in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, that laughter sweetens judgment. That means when a person is subjected to divine judgment, they can turn out to be negative. When you, through laughter itself, you have the ability of sweetening that justice. And I'll just share a little story that happened with my father. My father had a situation, it was a terrible, terrible emergency, and he saw no way of getting out of it. And when my father had such important issues, he would go to the Rabbi, because he knew the only one who can help him was the Rabbi. When the Rabbi heard my father's problem, the Rabbi started laughing. And that was the end of it. The whole problem disappeared. And he never heard any more from it. So my father always explained that the Rebbe's laughing wasn't funny. It was a very not funny thing, but the laughter sweetens judgment. So if there's any judgment, it's negative judgment, our laughing today should be the power to get rid of all that judgment. I also just did a little announcement. We're going to start a new series of the meaning of dreams, June 29th. Next week there will not be a class. This young girl goes to the zoo, and she goes over to the lion cage, and she puts her hand inside before her mother could say anything, and the lion grabs hold of her sleeve, and she couldn't extricate herself. She couldn't get out of this grip of the lion. And so there was an Israeli soldier who happened to be there, and he runs over and he punches the lion in the nose, and the lion just lets go of his grip. The New York Times, when they found out there was an Israeli soldier who did it, reported as follows: a right-wing Israeli assaults an African immigrant and steals his lunch. That's exactly how the media reports things. When Israel goes out of its way to not harm civilians, and no other army in the world has ever been as careful as Israel is, and yet they are charged with genocide. It's like mind-boggling, but that's the story over here.
Rabbi, along with what you said yesterday, CNN headline on the news comes across that Israel bombs Tehran, and then the next sentence is that Israel, the conflict began when Israel bombed Iran. That's it. It doesn't say that they only went after military installations. It doesn't say that anything about Iran, particularly going after civilian populations, and it completely took out of context
Sure. But
the nature of what's going on.
that's exactly the way the media operates all the time. When Israel is attacked, the media sometimes waits for Israel to retaliate. So the first item could be Israel attacks, and then they'll put a little, in the last column, they'll say that Israel was retaliating for this and this. Okay, that's the reality of the media today, most of the media anyhow. Some anti-Semite once said to this Jew, I can't take these Jews, they're all over. I'll give all my money if you could find me a place without Jews. And the Jewish man answered, yes, in the Gentile cemetery. Okay, so much for the dealing with the enemy. This Jewish man comes to court, and the judge says to him and scolds him, this is the 5th time I see you in court. You should be ashamed of yourself. And the Jew answers, Your Honor, this is the 5th time I've been seeing you in court. Do I criticize you? A doctor, an architect, and a lawyer and a politician were arguing over which profession had been established the longest in the world. Who was here first? So the doctor says, obviously the doctors were here first because in the beginning of Genesis, God performs surgery. He separates Eve from Adam. There has to be a doctor, a surgeon to do that. He must have been first. The architect says, 1 second. Before you can do surgery, you have to have a building. You have to have a world. You needed an architect to design the world. So the architect must have been here first. Then the lawyer says, but look, if you read Genesis, it says there was a lot of chaos. Who sorts out the chaos? Who brings order to the chaos? The lawyers, obviously. And the politician says, yeah, but who created the chaos? It's a very famous one. Someone tried to get rid of their old refrigerator. So they put it outside, and no one wants to take it. So he puts up a sign, $50 for this old refrigerator, and it was stolen. And it reminds me of a true story that happened in New York. There was a garbage collector's strike, and for days, maybe even weeks, there's like no garbage was taken. So someone thought of a brilliant idea. He took the garbage, put it in a box, and gift wrapped it with a ribbon, and put it outside. Within minutes, it was stolen. So thieves have a purpose in this world. This Jew comes to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, and as he's leaving, the rabbi says to him, you know, it's important to come to the synagogue. We're all in God's army, and you know, you should come more often. And the man says, I'm in the secret service. What does a dyslexic, agnostic, and insomniac do? They're up all night wondering whether there's a dog in the world. This Jew wins the lottery, but he didn't get the notice. His wife got the notice before he came home. And his wife was very concerned. He had a weak heart. The shock of knowing that he won $200 million would be too much for him. So she calls the rabbi. Could you give me some advice? What should I do? The rabbi says, let me handle it. Let him come to me, and I know how to divulge the good news in a way that he won't be shocked. So the rabbi comes to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, what would happen? What would you do if you would win the lottery, $200 million? What would you do? Rabbi, stop teasing me. You can't win the lottery, and I never won. And the rabbi says, but what would happen? I just said theoretically, what would happen if you would win the lottery? And he says, the rabbi, if I win the lottery, you can have half of it. And the rabbi faints. There's actually a deep lesson here. There was a story, the Rebbe once told this story of the olden days in little rural areas, Jews had no access to education, so if they had some money, they would hire a tutor, and the tutor would stay in the home, and they would pay the tutor to teach the kids. But there was another issue that the tutor took care of, because the Jews who lived in these rural areas very often were illiterate. They couldn't read. So whenever there would be mail, they would ask the tutor to read the mail. So one day the tutor is reading the mail, and the mail reads, sorry to notify you that your father passed away. And the Jew, the illiterate Jew, faints. So the question is, he couldn't even read the letter. Why does he faint? But the tutor who was reading the letter didn't faint. And the answer was, it wasn't his father. When it's not your father, it doesn't have the same effect. The same thing over here. When you knew that you won $100 million, the other guy didn't faint because he didn't know he won it. It was just theoretically. But when it's not theoretical, when it's real, it has a much bigger effect. And that's the lesson about our Judaism. We should take our Judaism seriously, like not like the tutor who's reading someone else's news, but it's about your own news. This rabbi was known for his emphasis on never getting angry, being patient, especially when it came to children. You have to know how to educate children. You can't use too much harshness. You have to be very mellow and very gentle. And one day he had his driveway repaved. And when the cement was still very moist, the children started dancing in the cement and destroying the whole new driveway. And the rabbi just blew his top. He couldn't handle it. He started screaming at them. And his wife overhears him screaming, so she says to him, my dear husband, you're always talking about not getting angry and not exploding and being able to take things in stride. And here you just exploded in anger. So the rabbi says, what I said was in the abstract, not when it's in the concrete. How do you test someone? Not when they talk theory. It's when it's real. It's in real life. Someone once asked, in the Congress they have a chaplain. So what does he do? Does he pray for the Senate or for the House? And the answer was, he looks at the Congress and prays for the country. Another story about a rabbi who was extremely positive about everything. He just always looked at things in a positive way. No matter how negative a situation was, he always found a silver lining, and he always emphasized the importance of positive thinking. And one day he ends up in the hospital, but he was very cheerful and very positive about it. And then the nurse comes into his room and she says to him, be positive. And he was shattered. My whole life I was always so positive, and here I come to the hospital, I think I'm positive, and the nurse tells me to be positive. In other words, she seems to think I'm not positive. So he says to the nurse, tell me, why did you admonish me to be positive? He says, I was telling you your blood type. There were two kids who were walking down the street, and the wind blew the kippah, the yarmulke of one of the kids. So the adult who was going with them tells the other kid, put your hand on the other kid's head. It happened to be his brother. So he says, am I my brother's keeper? This is a math problem. This kid is in school and the teacher says, imagine I gave you 2 bunnies, then I gave you another 2 bunnies, and I gave you another 2. How many would you have? Kid says 7. Okay, let me repeat the question. You have 2 cups of soda, of pop, and then I gave you another 2, then I gave you another 2. How many would you have? 6. Okay, so let me repeat the original question. I gave you 2 bunnies and another 2, then another 2. How many would you have? 7. So why over here would you have 6 and here it's 7? Because I already have 1 bunny. Children take things very simply. They don't think in circuitous ways. They're very, very honest. And they take things the way they are, not the way you want them to be. Everyone knows this one, I'm sure. This Jew takes his tallis to the cleaners. It was a new proprietors. They were Korean. And when he comes to pick up the tallis, he asked him, how much is it? He said, it's $30. $30 for cleaning a tallis? $10, I would think. He says, yeah, $10 for cleaning, $20 for taking out all the knots. This guy is driving down the highway and he gets an emergency call from his wife. And his wife said, on the news they just reported that there's some crazy guy who's driving in the wrong way of the wrong direction of the highway. He says, 1 person? Hundreds of them. There's a commandment in the Torah not to add to the commandments and not to subtract. So the question was once asked of a rabbi known as the Dubno Maggid. I mentioned him in the earlier class. He would always have parables for everything. So the question is asked, we understand why the Torah doesn't want us to subtract. Take 10 commandments and turn them into 9. But what's wrong with adding another one? So he used this parable. Someone moves into town and he goes to his neighbor and he says, can you do me a favor? Can I borrow a silver spoon? And the man says, sure. He wanted to be neighborly and friendly, so he gives him a silver spoon. And I'll return it tomorrow. And he returns it tomorrow with a little silver spoon as well. So the guy says, I only gave you 1 spoon, the large spoon, not the small one. He says, yeah, but the big one had a baby. So the guy thinks the guy's a little cuckoo, but I can't complain. I got another little silver spoon. A week later, he comes in and he says, Can I borrow a silver tray? And the man says, sure. And he comes back the next day with a little silver tray in addition. And again, he says the tray had a baby. Then he comes to him and he says, can I borrow your ornate candelabrum that was worth hundreds of, maybe thousands of dollars? And the man thinks, sure, be my guest. When will you return it? In a week. A week goes by, he doesn't return it. Another week goes by, now he's getting worried. So he approaches his neighbor, he says, what happened to the candelabrum? He says, oh, I'm sorry to tell you, it passed away. He says, it passed away? Are you crazy? He says, well, like if a spoon could have a baby spoon and a tray could have a baby tray, then a candelabrum could pass away. If you think you could add on to the commandments, then one day you'll decide, if I could add on, I could also subtract. In the Soviet Union, they didn't like the idea of believing in God, and they tried to indoctrinate students, kids, that there is no God. So this teacher was once admonishing his class, and he says to the students, we only believe in what we could see. We're in the world of reality. If you could see it, it's real. If you can't see it, it's not real. You can't see God, then it's not real. And one of the kids says, I can't see your brains either. Then there's the atheist who sends his kid to the Catholic school because it had the best secular education. It was a private school, and it was known for its very advanced curriculum. And the kid comes back one day talking about the Trinity. So the father, atheist father, calls his son over and he says, "Son, I want you to know that we don't believe there are no three gods. There's only one God, and we don't believe in him." What's the point? The point is that even the atheist, he protests, but his protest is a cover to his real beliefs. And a similar story was someone who was sitting with his friend Shabbos afternoon, and I said, I heard you don't believe in God. You stopped believing in God. And the man said, I don't want to talk about it. A day later, he confronts him and he says, tell me, I heard you don't believe in God anymore. He says, that's true. He says, well, why didn't you want to tell me that yesterday? He says, it was Shabbos. I'm going to talk about not believing in God on Shabbos? And then there's a true story that Elie Wiesel tells that he witnessed it, that during the Holocaust, the people over there summoned God to a trial. In Jewish law, when you have a complaint against someone else, you bring them to the Rabbinical court. Usually a Rabbinical court has 3 rabbis, and you hear both sides, and they charge God with all the terrible things that were happening, and the verdict was God is guilty. And they finished the trial, and what did they say? It's time for us to daven Ma'ariv. This one is a commentary on the human condition, the negative aspect of the human condition. When Jews had problems with their fellow Jews, when they had complaints about financial matters, you wouldn't go to the secular court, you would go to the rabbi. The rabbi operated as a judge, and the rabbi would render a verdict, either yes, you owe the money, or you don't owe the money, or whatever the situation was. And sometimes rabbis would also render judgment on matters of kashrus. If you were a butcher in those days, you would buy animals, you would pay whatever price for the animal, then you would have it slaughtered, and then the animal had to be inspected, especially the lungs. If the lungs turned out to not be kosher, because they were damaged in some way, you would have to sell it as non-kosher, and you would suffer a major loss. So if a cow cost $1,000 kosher, it was only $500 non-kosher. So the story is told, could be it's a true story also, the story is told of this man had a feud with his fellow about financial matters, and they come to the rabbi, and the rabbi ruled against him. And he exploded at the rabbi. He was so angry. He says, how could you rule against me? I was right and he was wrong, and this guy is a thief. And he couldn't forgive the rabbi for rendering a verdict not in his favor. So the rabbi says, I don't understand you. A few weeks ago, you came to me with a question about a cow, and I said the cow was not kosher, and you suffered a $500 loss. You didn't get angry at me. I caused you that loss, and now that I caused you a $300 loss, you explode. And what was his answer? He says, when the cow was rendered not kosher, this guy didn't get the money. In other words, sometimes it's not the loss itself that bothers people, it's the fact that someone else gained, someone else won. That's one of the weaknesses of the human condition. There was one rabbi who was known for his expertise in the area of kosher, and very often he would render an animal kosher where there was some question about it. See, when the lungs have certain types of adhesions, it could be a sign that there was a injury to that lung, and if the animal has an injury that could prove to be fatal, it's not kosher. So when you eat kosher meat, you know that that animal does not have any diseases that could have proven to be fatal. But sometimes there were questions about the injury, and the rabbi has to do the research into all the different sources of Jewish law and render a decision. And this rabbi was known to be lenient. He would render decisions contrary to some highly recognized authorities. So once they asked him, tell me, why are you always so lenient? Aren't you afraid to argue with these great authorities? He says, I'll tell you what, when I leave this world and they bring me before the heavenly tribunal, and they're going to charge me with disagreeing with these great rabbis, who am I going to be arguing with? These great rabbis. I don't mind being in their company and arguing with them. But if I render the animal non-kosher, who am I going to be arguing with? The animal. I don't want to be in a court case with animals. This woman comes on the bus, and the bus is crowded. So she says to one of the passengers, I want that seat. And if you knew what I have, you would give me that seat right away. And the person was terrified, and she vacates her seat. As she's leaving the bus, when the bus finally comes to her stop, the woman asked this woman, what do you have? She thought maybe she had some weapon or something. She said, I have a lot of chutzpah. True story I heard the story about several rabbis. It could be it happened with several of them. But in some communities, they would try to hire the greatest scholar to be the rabbi of the community. And in one case, or in several cases I know of, and going back a few hundred years, they hired this rabbi who was very young. He was in his late teens. And he happened to be so brilliant that he overshadowed everyone else, all the other scholars. But people were still upset about the fact that they took such a young rabbi. You know, here you have congregants that are in their 50s and 60s and noted scholars and everything, and they're going to have to listen to this whippersnapper. That's a Yiddish word, by the way. No, it isn't. So the people started to murmur. So the rabbi calls in the elders of the community. He says, let me ask you, does anyone find fault with my knowledge? No, God forbid, we know you're brilliant. Does anyone find fault with my counsel, my giving of advice? No, you're on the mark all the time. Does anyone find fault with the way I treat people? No, you treat everyone with such respect and such dignity. So the rabbi says, you know what? I have one fault I know of, but I promise you I will improve on that fault every day. I don't know if I told this one, but if I did, you might not remember it anyhow. This wealthy man was known to be a vicious person, terrible person. He would threaten people if they didn't give in to his demands. He wasn't charitable at all. He was a miser. He was just a disgusting individual. And he had a daughter of marriageable age. And he realized that as soon as he's going to want to marry her off, no one in town would ever marry into that family, even if the girl was not a bad person, but no one would want to get close to this. So it's obvious that he's going to have to look in other cities for people, and he'll present himself as a respectable leader of the community, a wealthy man. But the problem is they're going to come to the rabbi to find out about the family. And he knew that they're not going to say, the rabbi is not going to say nice things, because he knew that people hated him. So he goes to the rabbi and he says to the rabbi, you know what? My daughter is being discussed, a shidduch, a match with someone, and a very nice young man from another city, and they're going to probably come to you to ask them about me. What are you going to say about me? And of course, the way he said it like with a veiled threat that if you don't say the right thing, you're out of this town, you're going to be finished. He had that power that he could chase the rabbi out of town. So the rabbi says, I'm going to say that you're the nicest person in the world, that you're a scholar, a gentleman, you're kind, you're compassionate, everyone loves you. You're going to say all those nice things. So Rabbi, you're a smart man, you're a smart man. Sure enough, members of the family of the groom come to town, and they come to the rabbi's house, and they say to the rabbi, Rabbi, tell me about this man, this wealthy man. And he says all these nice things. He's wonderful, he's kind, he's compassionate, he's knowledgeable, he's charitable, all the greatest things. And they're in the seventh heaven. Wow, we never realized we're going to have such a match for our son. But as they're leaving, going to the door, to the exit, the rabbi said, I want to tell you something about myself. I'm the biggest liar on 2 feet. Someone had a store, and he passes away. And the store was very successful. People would come in all the time to buy things. And now his son inherits the store, and hardly anyone ever showed up in the store. So he goes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, what happened? My father was so successful, he was so prosperous because he had so many customers, and now no one shows up. And the rabbi says, I'll tell you why. Your father, every free minute that he had, he would study Torah. Now, everyone has a yetzer hara, an evil inclination. The evil inclination couldn't stand that. He says, I'm not going to let that man study Torah. I'm going to send him customers all day long, and they're going to make sure that he won't have a second to study. So that's why he was swamped with customers. You don't learn Torah. The yetzer hara has no reason to send you customers because you're not doing anything productive anyhow. He leaves you. Reb Zusha was one of the most famous Chassidic masters. He lived over 200 years ago. And there are many stories told about him. And he was a poor man. And at one point he had a 10 ruble, whatever the denomination was, note. And he had to go somewhere. He didn't want to take it with him. So he decided, where am I going to hide it? He says, I'll take a chumash, a Bible, and he opened it up to the 10 Commandments, and he put it right next to where it says, thou shalt not steal. No one is going to steal seeing what's written on that page. He comes back a few days later, he opens up the chumash, and it's gone, it's not there. And he leaps through the book, and he finds it, 5 rubles. Where, next to the verse, love your fellow as yourself. He says, you see how better that person was for me? I was only thinking about myself, and he was thinking about me as well. What's the definition of a liar? Rabbi Yitzchak of Volozhin, one of the great Lithuanian sages, said, some people have a good memory. They can remember what happened a year ago. Some can remember what happened 5 years ago, some 20 years, some 50 years. A liar could remember something that never even happened. Also, a good liar has to have a good memory to remember all the lies they told, that they all match up. This is not particularly a Jewish joke, but this guy goes to the store. This is in honor of Father's Day. He goes to the store, and when he's finished shopping, he's looking for his keys. And he can't find his keys. And this bothered him, not just because he couldn't find his keys, but because his wife always used to chide him. Whenever he would go anywhere, he would leave his keys in the ignition, so he shouldn't lose them. So he says, I'm I probably left him in the ignition. And he goes outside and the parking lot is empty. No car. He says, I'm really in trouble. Because obviously the thief stole the car. I left the key in the ignition. And he calls his wife and he says to his wife, I'm embarrassed to tell you that I left my keys in the ignition and the car was stolen. And she says, you idiot. I dropped you off. So now you have to come pick me up. Yeah, as soon as I convinced the police that I didn't steal the car. A new rabbi comes to town and they told him when he gives his initial speech, we have 4 conditions for your speech. It has to be short. It has to be on the parsha, on the weekly Torah reading. You have to introduce something novel, a novel idea, and it has to be true. And he says, I don't know the parsha. It was short, it was on the parsha, it was novel that the rabbi doesn't know the parsha, and it was true. Someone once gave an endorsement of a rabbi. He says, he's like Moses, King David, Shakespeare, and an angel. They were surprised that a rabbi could be so perfect, has all these qualities. He's like Moses, he stutters. He's like King David, he can't speak English. He's like Shakespeare, who doesn't know anything about Judaism. And he's an angel, he's not a mensch.
Wow.
Okay, the next one is a true story. It goes back about 200 years. I mentioned, I think, once before, there was a Chassid, a follower of the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman. His name was Shmuel Munkes. He was always into practical jokes, but he was a very spiritual person as well. But he would hide his spirituality with his antics. A lot of stories told about him. There's even a whole little book with all his antics. Once a woman comes running to the synagogue of the Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the Rebbe, and she doesn't know what the Rebbe looked like. She just knew he had a white beard, and so she sees a Jew sitting there with a white beard. It was Shmuel Munkes, and she thinks it's the Rebbe. She says, I have an emergency. You have to help me. What is the emergency? My daughter is giving birth, and the baby isn't coming out, and her life is in danger. So he said, say Yizkar 7 times. And she goes home, and she says Yizkar 7 times, and the baby is born. Now she wants to come to thank the Rebbe, so she comes back, but Shmuel Munkes wasn't there, but the Rebbe was there. So she comes to the Rebbe and says, I want to thank you for saving my daughter's life. He says, what are you talking about? He says, I came to tell you, she couldn't tell the difference between one rabbi and another. I came to tell you that my daughter was giving birth and something was preventing her from actually having the baby, and her life was in danger, and you told me to say Yizkar 7 times, and it worked. Well, the Alter Rebbe understood that this must be the practical joker who gave the solution of 7 times Yizkar, and he calls him in later on. He says, tell me, what's this thing about 7 times Yizkar? I never heard of that before. He says, look, what happens when they say Yizkar in the synagogue? All the young people go out. Yizkar is only said by people who don't have parents. He says, if saying Yizkar even once gets so many people to go out, I figured if you say Yizkar 7 times, the little baby will come out. This is in honor of Father's Day as well. Someone was diagnosed with a terrible illness, and the solution was a brain transplant. So they were looking for different brains, and they were pricing it. And they said if it's a male brain, it's $10,000. If it's a female brain, it's $1,000. So they were taken aback. He says, why is that? He says, because the female brain was used.
I like that one.
That was in honor of Father's Day, of course. there were kids who were arguing about something, about a bike. Who does the bike belong to? And they're really arguing, and this rabbi goes over to them and says, "What are you arguing about?" And they say, "We're arguing about the bike, and we decided whoever could say the biggest lie will get the bike." And the rabbi was very upset. Children shouldn't be saying lies. They shouldn't be advocating lying. He says, "You should know that when I was a child, as a child, I never said a lie." And the kids say, "Okay, Rabbi, you get the bicycle." As I mentioned last week, there were rabbis, when they published their writings, they would, before it was printed, they would go to great scholars and ask them for their approval, for their endorsement. And very often the rabbis had no choice, but the books were horrible and they couldn't put their seal on it. And the story is told, I don't know if it's a true story, that a guy who brought 2 books to the rabbi, and the rabbi took a look at them and they were horrible. They were just, he couldn't, but the man said, "Rabbi, I want you to give me and name the books." So he said, "Take this book, name it, and destroy it." "And what should I do with the other book?" "Name the other book after the one you destroyed." Some author wrote a commentary on the Torah, and he printed it with the text of the Torah. So the rabbi says, "You're brilliant." He says, "Why?" "Because you can't throw a text of the Torah out into the garbage. You protected your writings." This is a true story. I know the person who happened with. In the yeshiva in France, where I was a student, but this happened a few years before I was a student, the custom was that the students on Shabbos, Friday night, would go to the homes of different families to eat. The dormitory didn't provide meals on Friday night. You would go to families. And once 3 women were sitting together and discussing their student, because each one had usually a student who came every week, and they were talking about the student. "My student is smart, my student is this, my student is that." I hope it wasn't Lashon Hara, it wasn't negative, but they were talking about the students. And one said, "My student always comes early. He never comes on the fixed time, he always comes early." Another one says, "My student always comes on time, exactly on time. You could set your clocks to his schedule." And the other one said, "Mine always comes late." And then they asked each other who was the student, and it turned out it was the same student. I happen to have known that student. He's no longer alive. Very nice guy, but he was very smart as well. Okay, this one needs a little use of our brains. This rabbi, I think it was the Dubno Maggid, the same one I mentioned before, who had parables, was traveling and he visited a town and he needed a place to stay, to eat and sleep. And he comes to this family. They were well-to-do, they were comfortable, but very miserly. And he was hungry. He hadn't eaten all day, so they said, "We're sorry, we can't give you much. We can give you a piece of bread and some water, because we can't afford some real gourmet meals." So they gave him a bed and he went to sleep hungry. He was starving. A few minutes after he had gone to sleep, they figured out he's probably sleeping now, and they took out their gourmet food and they were eating a hearty meal, because they had food, but they didn't want to share it with him. So the next day, and he couldn't fall asleep, so he overheard everything they were saying and everything they were doing. He could hear that they were eating. The next day, he said, "You helped me understand something in the Torah. It says in the Torah that we should always follow the customs where we go, as long as they're kosher. He says that Moses did the same thing. He says Moses didn't eat. The 40 days he was on the mountain, he didn't eat. Why didn't he eat? Because the angels don't eat. When you're in Rome, you act like the Romans. When you're in heaven, you act like the angels. So he didn't eat because the angels don't eat. But I always had this question, how did he know the angels didn't eat? Maybe after Moses went to sleep, maybe that's when they took out their food and they ate the food. And the answer is, that proves that Moses didn't sleep either, just like me. Someone comes into the library and goes over to the librarian and says, I want some fries and a Coke. And the librarian says, shh, I want some fries and a Coke. A lot of these stories are critical of misers by design, because Judaism can't tolerate people whose hands are clenched, their fists are clenched, and they don't spread out their hands. The Torah has a commandment that says, don't close your hands from your brother. You have to have open hands to share what you have with others. One of the reasons Judaism doesn't get along with communism, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons is the whole idea that the government takes care of all your needs is very unhealthy. Because what happens when if you don't keep your hands open, what happens? They begin to close naturally. In order for your hands to be able to open, they have to keep on opening. And the same thing works with your heart. If your heart is never opened, it'll become tighter and tighter. If you don't have to give charity, if you don't have to help others personally, because the government is doing it, then you become very cold and very closed. So once this guy comes to a wealthy man's house for some help, he wanted to eat, and the man hid in the closet. He didn't want to be seen. So the person should leave. He's not there. He can't take care of his needs. Well, this guest understood what was happening, and he said that it says in the Talmud that welcoming a guest is greater than welcoming God. If God comes to visit you, and you have a guest, a human guest that comes, you tell God, God, you could wait. He can't wait. She can't wait. And we know this from Abraham. Abraham was visited by God after he circumcised himself, and then 3 people, angels disguised as people, come. And what does Abraham do? Abraham tells God, wait, I have to take care of the guests. So that from there we see that welcoming a guest is greater than welcoming God. Obviously, welcoming God is greater, but God himself says, I want you to welcome the guest and not me. Take care of the needs of the people first. So he says, you demonstrated this to me in the way you behaved when he met him eventually. He says, when Moses saw the burning bush and the manifestation of God's presence, what did he do? He hid his face. It says, you hid your whole body. So that shows that welcoming guests is greater than welcoming God, because to welcome God, he just had to cover his face, but to welcome a guest, he had to cover his whole body. One of the commandments directed to a judge is not to take a bribe. And it says in the Torah that taking a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise. That if a person takes a bribe, it literally will cause the person to become blind. And there was the judge who was known to take bribes. But he didn't become blind, he became deaf. So they once asked him, how do you account for the fact that you became deaf? So you should have become blind. He says, I only heard the bribes, I never really saw the money. Famous, again, another Chassidic court, there's a Jew by the name of Heschel Astropolier. He was also a clown, a court jester. And once he said to God, he was very poor, he said to God, God, it says that 1,000 years to you are like one day. So can you give me a loan and I'll repay it tomorrow, in 1,000 years. So God says, sure, come back tomorrow. German Jews are known for their punctuality. They are always on time. If you go to a German Jewish synagogue and the services are scheduled for 9 a.m., 2 minutes before 9, the shul is empty. At 9, it's full. They don't come early, they don't come late, they're always on time. That's the nature of German Jews, and maybe of Germans in general. They're very punctual. So they tell the story of this German Jew who was a very successful businessman, but his business was going downhill. And he comes to shul, and the rabbi looks at him and sees that he's very depressed. So he calls him over and he says, what's wrong? What has happened in your life? And he says, my business is going down. So the rabbi says, you should pray. Say some psalms, pray, and God will certainly help. So he says, okay, Rabbi, I'll follow your advice. Next week he comes back to the synagogue and he's even more depressed. The rabbi asks him what happened. He says, things got even worse. I'm on the verge of bankruptcy. Things couldn't be as bad as they are now. They got worse. Did you pray? Yes, but it didn't work. The man didn't show up in the synagogue for months. And one day the rabbi is walking down the street, and who does he bump into? The German Jew. And the man is all smiles. So the rabbi asks, what happened? He says, things turned around incredibly, and I'm doing better than I ever did before. You know what? God is great. He's just not punctual. And we say that in our prayers. We don't use those words, but we say to God, God, it's about time that you bring us Mashiach. You're late. The Jewish man on his deathbed, a very pious man on his deathbed, says to his wife, please can you call the priest to say my last prayers with me? She says, the priest? You were a righteous Jew your whole life and now you want the priest? He says, yeah, the weather is terrible. I'm not going to call the rabbi out in this terrible weather. A mother and a father come with a newborn baby to the rabbi. And there's a dispute, obviously, how to name the child. The father says, I want to name the child after my father. And what's your father's name? Moshe. And the wife says, I want to name the child after my father. And what was your father's name? Moshe. So what's the problem? So the wife says, my father was a righteous man. His father was a scoundrel. I don't want to name my baby after his father. He was such a terrible person. So the rabbi said, I'll tell you what. Name the baby Moshe. If he grows up to be a tzaddik, then it was after your father. If he grows up to be a scoundrel, it's after his father. The priest comes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I live in a neighborhood and there's so many break-ins. What do I do? How do you protect your house? So the rabbi says, we have a mezuzah. A mezuzah is a protection. We do the mezuzah because it's God's commandment, but it says that the mezuzah also is a protection. That's why it's important to have a mezuzah for that reason alone, to make sure the mezuzah is a kosher mezuzah. So the priest says, can I put up a mezuzah on my doorpost? Sure. So the priest puts up mezuzahs on his house, and the rabbi meets him a few weeks later, and he says, how are things going? Any more break-ins? He says, no more break-ins. But things got worse. I have so many charity collectors coming to my door now. This mother comes to see her daughter. And she came to visit. They lived far apart. So the daughter lived in an apartment building, and the mother was never there before. So the mother tells the daughter. The mother lived in an apartment building, and the daughter didn't know how to get there, how to get into the house. So she says, when you come to the entrance, take your elbow and push the button 306. and the door will open. You get to the elevator, take your elbow and push the elevator button, and then push the 3rd floor with your elbow. When you come to the apartment, push the button with your elbow so the bell rings. So the daughter says, "What's this thing about pushing my elbow?" So what, are you coming empty-handed? Two doctors and an HMO manager died, and they want to go into the gates of paradise. So the doctor says, "All my life I've been healing patients, saving lives. You can go right in." The next doctor comes, "All my life I've been delivering babies, bringing new life into the world. You're righteous for doing all that. Go straight into paradise." The director of the HMO comes and he says, "All my life I've been managing the HMO, so you can go in for 3 days. After that you can go to hell." There's a cantor who insured his voice, and when he told someone that he insured his voice, the person said, "So what did you do with the money?" A horse dies and drops dead on the property of this Jew, of this rabbi. We like to always blame rabbis for everything. And he didn't know what to do with the horse, so he calls up the health department, and they say there's no problem. He sends him to the police. The police sends to the health department sends to the sanitation department, and then they send him to the mayor. The mayor was a rotten guy, a terrible guy. So the mayor says to the rabbi, "Why are you bothering me with this horse? You rabbis, you take care of the burying the dead, you do it yourself." The rabbi says, "Yes, I'll take care of it, but I always like to notify the next of kin." The Brit, the Frenchman, and the Russian are viewing a painting of Adam and Eve before they partook of the forbidden fruit, before they were chased out of Garden of Paradise. So the Brit says they must have been British because they're so calm and not upset about anything. They're very calm and composed. The Frenchman says they must be French because they're so erotic. And the Russian says, no, they must be Russian, who have only eaten and have an apple to eat, and they think they're in paradise. They have no clothing, no shelter, and only an apple, and they think they're in paradise. Okay, I'll tell one or two more. Someone wrote this poem in an argument with a member of another faith. Roses are reddish, violets are bluish. When the real Messiah comes, you'll wish you were Jewish.
Ah, good one.
And this one is relevant today. God says to the angels complain to God, why are you giving the Jews such a beautiful country, land of milk and honey? It's blessed with everything. Do they really deserve it? He says, wait until you see the neighbors I'm going to give them. The guy comes into the bar and he orders 3 beers. Why 3? He says, because we're 3 brothers, and whenever we drink, we always have in mind the others. So I drink one for myself, and I drink another 2 beers for my 2 brothers. And this goes on for years. He always orders 3 beers and drinks 3 beers. One day he comes in and he orders only 2 beers. So the bartender thinks, well, must mean that one of the brothers died. He says, why only 2 beers? What happened? He says, I quit drinking. Okay. I left out a lot of these jokes, but what's the definition of a Jewish joke? Three categories. It has to be either a joke that involves Jewish tradition itself, a joke about believing in God, a joke about deciding matters of Jewish law. That's a Jewish joke because it involves Judaism. It could be a Jewish joke if the joke is about something that's tangentially connected to Jewish life. Mocking rabbis, of course, is part of Jewish life, and cantors, and anyone who has a public position. Or a Jewish joke could be any joke if it has a moral, if it has a lesson that can be used to enhance our own lives and our own spirituality and our own morality. If it's just a frivolous joke, it has no substance to it, no meaning to it. It might be funny, but I couldn't call it a Jewish joke. And even if it's told by a Jewish comedian, and of which there are many, and as I mentioned in the past, that if the joke is vulgar or it's just mean for the sake of being mean, without a lesson from it, then it wouldn't be a kosher Jewish joke. So let's hope that we can continue laughing, and there should be only joy and laughter. And the ultimate joy will be when Mashiach comes. Then it says we'll be able to fill our mouths with laughter. We'll be laughing all the time.
Amen, amen, amen.
You hearing voices? We had a laughter track here. So again, the next class will be Sunday, June 29th. And the topic will be the meaning of dreams from the perspective of Judaism, obviously. Thank you.
Cultures.
Any questions? Okay, everyone have a nice day.
You too.
Remember,
Thank you.
no class next Sunday.
Rabbi, is there a class Tuesday?